The newborn baby suddenly said a phrase that gave the doctor goosebumps. The beeping of the heart rate monitor echoed continuously in the suffocating atmosphere of the operating room. The surgical lights cast a blinding glare onto the sweat-drenched face of Dr. Michael Roberts, who was tensely monitoring the condition of the mother-to-be. Eleanor Foster, a young woman, lay on the delivery table, her face pale. Her breathing was rapid, and her hands clenched the edges of the bed as if trying to hold on to the last remnants of her strength. Beside her, the midwife, Beatrice Lewis, gently patted the patient's shoulder to reassure her. "Breathe deeply, Eleanor. You need to push harder. Just a little more." But Eleanor could only shake her head, her voice breaking from exhaustion. I can't. I have no strength left." Michael frowned, glancing quickly at the monitor. The readings were alarming. The baby's heart rate was dropping. He turned to his colleague, Andrew Harris, and ordered, "Prepare the forceps. We don't have any more time." A strange cold draft swept through the room, making Beatrice shudder. This was a high-end private hospital in New York. The delivery room doors were always sealed shut, and the air conditioning maintained a stable temperature. Yet, the atmosphere suddenly turned eerily cold. Eleanor screamed in agony as Michael maneuvered the instrument to assist in delivering the baby. Time seemed to slow as the newborn was finally brought out of the mother's body. But at that very moment, something horrifying happened. No cry was heard. No sound came from the child. The room instantly plunged into absolute silence. Beatrice's face turned pale as she stared at the tiny body still covered in blood and amniotic fluid in Michael's hands. The surrounding nurses froze in place. The silence lasted only a few seconds but felt like an eternity. And then, the baby opened its eyes. Its eyes were unlike those of a normal newborn, too sharp, too deep, as if they held the soul of an adult. Michael felt his breath catch as that gaze locked onto him, piercing straight into his core. And then, in a deep, grave voice, the baby spoke. "You killed me once. This time, you won't escape." A blood-curdling scream shattered the stillness. Claire Bennett, a young nurse who had only been working for less than a year, shrieked and dropped the tray of surgical instruments. The clatter of metal crashing onto the floor echoed through the already tense room. Michael stood frozen. Cold sweat drenched his entire body. His hands, still holding the baby, trembled violently. "No, impossible," he murmured, feeling as though he had misheard. But no. The baby continued to stare at him, its lips pressing into a knowing smirk, as if mocking the horror in his eyes. Eleanor, still dazed from childbirth, struggled to open her eyes and weakly asked, What's happening? Is my baby okay?" No one answered. Beatrice bit her lip hard, her face drained of color. She swallowed, her hands shaking as she stepped cautiously toward Michael and carefully took the baby from his arms. "Maybe, we misheard." Her voice was so soft it was barely a whisper. Claire still clutched her chest, her eyes wide with terror. Another nurse, Ray Sanders, normally a composed and level-headed person, couldn't hide his tension either. "Should we call a priest?" Ray murmured. But Michael immediately snapped. "Shut up. Don't bring superstitious nonsense into this hospital." Yet despite his words, he himself couldn't shake the feeling that this was anything but an illusion. Beatrice took a deep breath and quickly wrapped the baby in a cloth, trying to maintain her composure as she placed it in the newborn crib. But the moment her hands left the baby, everyone held their breath. The baby still didn't cry. Every newborn lets out their first cry to signal life. But this child didn't. It simply lay there, its eyes wide open, observing everyone as if it understood everything happening around it. "Oh my God," Claire whispered, gripping Ray's arm tightly. Outside in the hallway, a group of nurses who had been waiting for news of the delivery began whispering after hearing the earlier screams. An elderly doctor, Samuel Nelson, curiously stepped inside and asked, "Is everything all right?" No one answered. Samuel frowned as he saw the horror etched onto Michael's face. Then, he turned to look at the baby in the crib. His expression darkened. "Michael," Samuel lowered his voice, pulling him aside. "Something is very wrong with this child." Michael took a deep breath, trying to regain the stern demeanor of a doctor. "Don't be ridiculous. It's just a newborn." Samuel smirked slightly, but his eyes never left the baby. "A normal newborn doesn't have eyes like that, Michael." Silence swallowed the room whole. A moment later, Michael turned away, his voice firmer than ever. "No one is allowed to speak about this outside. If I hear even a single rumor about this, that person will lose their job immediately." Beatrice looked at him, her lips trembling, but she dared not protest. Claire clung tightly to Ray, her entire body still shaking. Inside the crib, the baby remained still. No crying. Barely any movement. Just wide open eyes, watching every action of the adults around it. As if it had been here for a long, long time. After Eleanor Foster's bizarre delivery, the atmosphere in New York General Hospital grew inexplicably heavy. From nurses and doctors to janitors, everyone felt an unsettling presence creeping through the hallways, lurking in the hospital's darkest corners. Everything started with the whispers. "That baby, it didn't cry. Did you see its eyes? My God, I swear it was looking at me, like it knew I was afraid." Claire said it, spoke. But how can a newborn baby speak? At first, the murmurs were just quiet gossip among the nurses during breaks. But as time passed, fear grew as strange incidents continued to unfold throughout the hospital. In the neonatal care unit, where Matthew, Eleanor's son, was being monitored, the nurses began to notice an inexplicable chill every time they entered the room. "Beatrice, have you noticed anything strange?" a young nurse, Isabel Martin, asked as she stepped out of the neonatal care room, her face pale. "What do you mean?" Beatrice frowned. I heard something," Isabel whispered, glancing around nervously. "A whisper, right inside that room." Beatrice shuddered. She looked toward the glass door of the nursery. Inside, Matthew still lay in his tiny crib, his eyes wide open, staring unblinking at the ceiling. No crying. No restless movements like the other infants. Just lying there, unnaturally alert. Isabel grabbed Beatrice's arm, her voice trembling. "When I was checking on him, I heard a voice." "A voice? Whose?" "No one's." Isabel shook her head, swallowing hard. "But it whispered right in my ear. A deep, raspy voice. I couldn't understand it, but I felt, it wasn't human." A cold draft brushed against Beatrice's neck. She looked deep into Isabel's eyes and knew she wasn't lying. The strange occurrences didn't stop. Another nurse, Ray Sanders, who was on the night shift that evening, swore he had seen the shadow of a small child running down the hallway leading to the neonatal unit. "I thought it was someone's kid, so I ran after it, but when I reached the corner, there was no one there." Ray recounted, his face tense. "Are you sure?" "Maybe it was just a trick of the light," another doctor said, trying to reassure him. "I'm not mistaken." Ray insisted. "I saw it. A child, but when I got closer, it vanished right before my eyes." The rumors spread further. Dr. Michael Roberts, the very doctor who delivered Eleanor's baby, was not spared from the haunting either. From the night the baby was born, he began to suffer from insomnia. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Matthew's gaze, those deep, dark eyes filled with an emotion no newborn should possess. Then came the nightmares. Michael dreamed he was standing in the delivery room, his hands covered in blood. On the operating table lay a newborn, dead, staring straight at him. Suddenly, it sat up, a twisted smile stretching across its tiny face, and it spoke. "You killed me. Michael jolted awake in the middle of the night, drenched in cold sweat. His heart pounded violently. And it wasn't just the nightmares. Even during the day, while working, he constantly felt as if someone was watching him. Once, while writing patient records, he looked up and saw Matthew's tiny figure reflected in his office mirror. But when he turned around, there was no one there. Impossible. I'm imagining things. Michael told himself, but his heartbeat refused to settle, hammering against his ribs in fear. The more he tried to ignore it, the more the strange occurrences intensified. One day, as Michael was walking through the inpatient ward, a raspy voice called out to him. "Dr. Roberts." Michael turned. It was an elderly patient, Mr. Ethan, a man who had spent most of his life in the hospital due to chronic heart disease. "What is it, Mr. Ethan?" Michael asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The old man slowly looked up, his eyes cloudy yet filled with understanding. "You are being watched." Michael froze. "What do you mean?" "I don't know what you did in the past," Ethan whispered. "But that soul has not moved on." Michael's throat went dry. "What soul?" Ethan tilted his head, locking eyes with him. "The child." Michael shot to his feet, cold sweat trickling down his spine. "You're talking nonsense, Mr. Ethan. You can say that." Ethan's voice was as light as the wind. "But one day, it will force you to face the truth." Michael turned away, trying to dismiss those words. But all the way back to his office, his heart pounded violently in his chest. Because he knew. Ethan's words might not be meaningless. Nurse Maria Owens sat in the records room, her eyes scanning through the pages of documents. She had been working at New York General Hospital for nearly a year, but she had never seen the atmosphere here turn this heavy. The rumors about the strange baby, Matthew Foster, were spreading rapidly. Maria wasn't someone who easily believed in supernatural tales, but even she couldn't deny that something was off about this child. Since Matthew's birth, everyone around the hospital had felt uneasy. She had witnessed firsthand how the nurses whispered nervously in the hallways, how Dr. Michael Roberts had become increasingly exhausted, plagued by insomnia, and most importantly, how strange events kept occurring within the hospital. She needed to find out why. Maria carefully flipped through the documents related to Matthew Foster. The numbers seemed normal: weight, length, initial health condition. But something made her stop. Matthew's birthdate, March 14th. Her eyes narrowed slightly. That date felt familiar. She turned to her computer, typing into the system to search old medical records. March 14th, 20 years ago. Her hands trembled slightly as an old file appeared on the screen. Patient, Sophia Grant. Condition, stillbirth due to complications during labor. Cause of death, asphyxiation at birth. Attending physician, Michael Roberts. Maria frowned. She had reviewed many patient records before, but something didn't feel right. She flipped through Sophia Grant's medical file. The pages looked too perfect. No crossed-out text, no signs of any corrections. But from her experience, old medical records almost always had at least a few minor revisions due to data updates. She kept examining. And then, she saw it. A tiny irregularity in the signature section. Typically, a doctor's signature was always written in either blue or black ink. But on this record, Michael Roberts' signature was slightly smudged, as if it had been written over a second time. Maria's heart pounded. A chilling thought formed in her mind. This record had been tampered with. Maria took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She decided to dig deeper into Sophia Grant. But there were no records of any surviving family members, nor was there any information on what had happened to the baby's body. She checked the list of doctors who had been working at the hospital at the time. And just as she suspected, Michael Roberts had been there. 20 years ago, on March 14th, a baby had died in this very delivery room. Quickly gathering the documents, a shiver ran down her spine. If Michael had done something wrong in the past. Could this have anything to do with Matthew? She had to find out more. That afternoon, Maria decided to confront Dr. Michael Roberts. She found him in his office, his face gaunt, dark circles deep under his eyes from sleepless nights. "Dr. Roberts, I need to talk to you." Michael looked up, his eyes filled with suspicion. "About what?" Maria placed a file on his desk. "I found a record of an infant death from 20 years ago." Michael stiffened. "So what?" His voice hardened. Maria observed him closely, noticing how his hands clenched the edge of the desk. "There's something wrong with this file. It's been altered." Michael let out a short, dry laugh, but the tension in his eyes was undeniable. "What exactly are you implying?" Maria took a deep breath, meeting his gaze directly. "Doctor, did that child really die from natural complications?" Michael shot up from his chair, panic flashing in his eyes. "You're talking nonsense, Maria. Stop digging into the past." But Maria refused to back down. "Then why was the file altered?" she pressed, her voice unwavering. "And why, was Matthew born exactly on March 14, 20 years after that event?" Michael's face turned pale. He took a step back as if he couldn't bear the weight of the conversation any longer. "I don't know." His voice came out as a hoarse whisper. "I don't know." But Maria knew he was lying. That night, Maria returned to her apartment, but she couldn't stop thinking about what she had discovered. She sat in front of her computer, continuing to search for more information about Sophia Grant. But her records barely existed. There were no reports of any relatives claiming her death. No complete autopsy report. No official death certificate for the baby. As if they had never existed at all. A chilling thought crossed Maria's mind. If Michael and the hospital's administration had been covering up the truth for 20 years, could it be possible that the baby from back then had never truly died? Maria swallowed hard. Outside her window, the night wind howled through the trees, carrying a heavy sense of unease. She had a feeling, this wasn't over. After uncovering the mystery behind the infant death 20 years ago, Nurse Maria Owens could no longer rest easy. She tried to go about her work as usual, but the eerie occurrences at New York General Hospital became more and more undeniable. Especially around Matthew Foster. In the neonatal care unit, some nurses began refusing to take night shifts. Those who remained constantly whispered about the strange things happening each night. "I swear Matthew's crib moved on its own." A young nurse, Lucy Parker, shuddered as she spoke. "I turned my back for just a minute, and when I looked again, it had shifted to the side." "Maybe someone pushed it," another nurse, Sergio Martin, offered a rational explanation. "That's impossible. I was alone in the room." Lucy shook her head, eyes wide with fear. And that wasn't all. Claire Bennett, the nurse who had witnessed Matthew speak in the delivery room, had completely broken down. She kept seeing shadowy figures flicker through the hallways at night, and once, she even heard faint laughter right next to her ear while checking the neonatal unit. "I can't take this anymore." Claire sobbed as she spoke to Maria in the break room. "I'm quitting. I'd rather be unemployed than stay in this place." And true to her words, the very next day, Claire submitted her resignation. Not long after Claire left, Ray Sanders, the nurse in charge of reviewing the security cameras, discovered something terrifying. At 3 a.m., while going through the footage from the neonatal unit, he noticed something unusual. "Maria, you need to see this." Ray called her into the surveillance room. On the screen, the recording from the previous night played. At first, everything seemed normal. A row of small cribs with peacefully sleeping infants, the dim glow of the hallway lights reflecting off the glass. But then, Matthew's crib began to shake. No one was there. No nurse stood nearby. Yet it rocked slightly, slowly, as if an invisible hand was pushing it. And then, a shadow flickered at the far end of the room. A small shadow. The size of a child. Maria felt her heart clench as the image became clearer on the screen. That was no ordinary shadow. It had the shape of an infant, a hazy, ghostly figure with eyes like dark voids. Maria stepped back, her breath quick and shallow. "What the hell is happening?" Ray whispered, his face drained of color. No one answered. And it wasn't just the security cameras. A young doctor, Alexander Turner, had a horrifying experience while performing an ultrasound on a pregnant patient. At first, everything was normal. He carefully moved the probe across the woman's belly, watching the fetus's image appear on the screen. But then, Alexander frowned. "Wait, what is that?" He narrowed his eyes, staring at the monitor. On the screen, besides the fetus, there was a strange shadow. A second face. A tiny face, eyes wide open staring straight at him. Alexander jolted, his hand trembling as he dropped the probe. The patient panicked. "What's wrong, doctor?" Alexander stammered, trying to steady himself, but cold sweat was already running down his back. "And nothing." He lied. "Just a signal glitch." But he knew, it wasn't a glitch. And the most terrifying part. That face, looked just like Matthew. While Maria and the other nurses were bewildered by the strange occurrences, Dr. Michael Roberts was sinking deeper into his own torment. Every time he walked through the hospital corridors, something felt off. Every time he passed by a mirror, he would glimpse a small figure standing behind him. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the whisper right beside his ear. "You killed me." That night, Michael decided to take a strong sedative before trying to sleep. He didn't want to dream anymore. But just as he was starting to relax in his office chair. Click. The door creaked open. Michael stiffened, turning around. No one was there. But then, a bone-chilling gust of wind swept through the room. His heartbeat pounded. He heard a faint laugh. A quiet, eerie giggle, as light as a breath of air, yet echoing deep into his mind. And then, right before his eyes, a small figure emerged from the darkness. An infant. Standing there. Staring at him. Michael screamed in terror. He stumbled backward, his hand fumbling for the light switch. But when the room flooded with brightness, there was nothing. Only Michael, trembling, breath ragged, sweat dripping from his face. But he knew. He hadn't imagined it. Matthew was not an ordinary child. He had returned. And this time, he wasn't leaving. Dr. Michael Roberts was no longer himself. He had always prided himself on his ability to maintain composure in any situation, but ever since the birth of Matthew Foster, he had lost the calmness that once defined him. Sleep had become an endless nightmare. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw himself standing in the delivery room, his hands drenched in blood. On the operating table, a newborn stared up at him, a twisted smile on its tiny lips. "You killed me." Michael jolted awake, gasping for breath. Cold sweat soaked through his shirt, his heart pounding violently as if it would burst from his chest. He looked at the clock, 3:14 a.m. That time again. For 4 consecutive nights, he had woken up at this exact moment. "I can't go on like this," he muttered, reaching for the pill bottle on his bedside table. He grabbed a sedative and swallowed it dry. But as he turned back, he froze. In the mirror across the room, a small figure stood behind him. But the child had no reflection. Michael spun around only to find the room empty. The next day, Michael entered the hospital looking pale and exhausted. Nurse Maria Owens noticed immediately. "Doctor, are you all right?" she asked, frowning. Michael flinched, quickly shaking his head. "I'm fine." His voice was hoarse. But Maria didn't believe him. Throughout the shift, Michael was a shell of his former self. He kept glancing over his shoulder as if someone were following him. During surgery, his hands trembled so badly that he nearly dropped the scalpel. Worse yet, he began hearing whispers. Soft laughter. The faint sound of a baby crying. At first, he convinced himself it was just his imagination. But when he glanced at the glass panel of the operating room, he saw it. Matthew. Standing outside, pressing his tiny face against the glass, staring at him without blinking. "You killed me." Michael screamed, stumbling backward. The entire surgical team froze. "Doctor, what's wrong?" Andrew Harris asked, alarmed. Michael turned back toward the window. There was nothing there. I'm just tired," he stammered. But everyone could see he wasn't just tired. He was losing control. That night, Michael decided to visit an old patient, Mr. Ethan, the man who had warned him about the lingering soul. "You've seen it, haven't you?" Ethan spoke the moment Michael entered the hospital room. Michael stiffened. "Seen what?" He tried to keep his voice steady. Ethan smirked. "You can't fool me, doctor." The old man's eyes glowed with deep understanding. "That spirit has latched onto you." Michael clenched his fists. "You're talking nonsense." "No, I'm not." Ethan shook his head. "I can feel it. It's here." A chill crawled up Michael's spine. Ethan slowly lifted his head, whispering. "Do you know why it won't leave?" Michael remained silent. Ethan's lips curled into a knowing smile. "Because you owe it something." Michael's heart pounded. "I owe nothing to anyone." Ethan let out a quiet chuckle. "You're only lying to yourself." Michael stood abruptly, trying to regain his composure. "You should focus on your own treatment." But as he turned to leave, Ethan whispered one last thing. "It won't stop, until you confess." That night, Michael returned home and drank strong liquor, hoping to drown his fear. But when he stepped into the bathroom, his toothbrush slipped from his hand, falling to the floor. The mirror in front of him. It didn't reflect his image. Instead, it showed a hospital room. And inside, a newborn lay on the operating table. Eyes wide open. Staring straight at him. Michael screamed, stumbling backward, slamming his hands against the mirror. But the image did not disappear. "You killed me." The whisper came from inside the mirror. This time, it wasn't just one voice. It echoed, multiplying, filling the entire room. Michael panicked and bolted out of his house. Out on the streets of New York, the dim yellow lights of passing cars blurred before his eyes. He gasped for breath, cold sweat trickling down his back. He had to do something. But no matter how far he ran, no matter how hard he tried to escape, the whispers followed him. "You killed me. You killed me. You killed me." And this time, Michael knew. There was no way out. 3 days after the terrifying incident in the operating room, Dr. Michael Roberts was barely recognizable. Everyone at New York General Hospital noticed his drastic change. His face was pale, his dark circles deeper than ever, and he walked with the sluggishness of a man trapped in an endless nightmare. But more terrifying than his appearance was the way he could no longer hide his fear. He flinched at the smallest sounds. He avoided dark hallways. And strangest of all, he refused to go anywhere near the neonatal unit, where Matthew Foster lay. Michael's behavior didn't escape Maria Owen's attention. She had been suspicious for a long time, but now she was certain Michael was hiding something terrible. And she needed to uncover it. That evening, Maria walked straight into Michael's office without knocking. Dr. Roberts jumped in his chair at the sight of her. "What the hell are you doing?" he snapped, but his trembling voice betrayed his fear. Maria wasn't intimidated. She strode forward and threw a stack of medical records onto his desk. "I know the truth." Michael froze. "What truth?" "About the child who died 20 years ago." Maria's gaze was unwavering. "And about you?" Michael's hands clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Stop pretending, doctor." Maria's voice was ice cold. "I've seen the files. I know they were altered. And I know you were the one who performed that delivery." Michael went rigid. "You have no proof," he whispered, though even he didn't believe his own words. Maria smirked. "Not yet." She placed a hand on the documents. "But I will find it. And I won't stop." Michael shot up from his chair, his eyes wild with panic. "You don't know what you're dealing with." He gritted his teeth. "Drop this, Maria. Before it's too late." Maria didn't back down. "Too late for who, doctor?" Michael opened his mouth to respond, but suddenly. Click. The office door creaked open. A cold draft swept through the room, freezing them both in place. Michael spun around, his breath caught in his throat. Out in the hallway, a small figure stood there. No one else. Just Matthew, staring directly at Michael. Not speaking. Not moving. Just watching. Michael staggered, his hand gripping the edge of the desk tightly. "No, this can't be," he murmured. But Maria wasn't looking at Matthew. She was looking at Michael. And in that moment, she realized something. Michael knew exactly what he had done 20 years ago. Michael slammed the office door shut immediately. His back pressed against it, his breathing ragged. Maria remained standing, her gaze fixed on him. "What are you running from?" she whispered. Michael trembled. He closed his eyes. And then, the memories he had buried for 2 decades came rushing back. 20 years ago. New York General Hospital. That night, Michael was the lead doctor in a complicated delivery. The patient was Sophia Grant, a young woman pregnant with her first child. The labor lasted more than 8 hours. Sophia lost too much blood, her strength fading fast. When Michael performed the final procedure, the baby was born. But it didn't cry. "Doctor, my baby?" Sophia asked weakly, her vision blurred by pain. Michael looked down at the infant in his hands. A weak heartbeat. The lungs weren't functioning properly. He decided to perform an emergency procedure to save it. But he made a mistake. A small miscalculation. A moment of carelessness. And the baby stopped breathing. Michael froze. A wave of panic crashed over him. He tried to resuscitate the child, but it was too late. Sophia never knew the truth. The hospital forged the records. They claimed the baby had died from natural complications. No one ever found out. No one, except Michael. And now, perhaps the child knew too. Maria studied every flicker of emotion on Michael's face. She knew he was remembering. "What did you do to that baby?" she asked slowly. Michael didn't answer. Outside the window, the wind howled. The whispering returned, drifting through the air. "You killed me." Michael shot up, shouting. "Shut up." But no one spoke. No one was in the room. Only him. And in the mirror. He no longer looked like a doctor. He looked like a condemned man awaiting his punishment. Maria took a step back. "I will uncover the truth," she whispered. "And when I do, you won't be able to hide anymore." Michael didn't respond. He only stared at the mirror, where his reflection was beginning to distort. And behind him, in the glass, a small child with deep, black eyes was smiling. Michael Roberts no longer recognized himself. For the past 4 days, he hadn't slept. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the baby Matthew standing there in the darkness, watching him with eyes that did not belong to a newborn. Every time he looked in the mirror, its small figure was reflected behind him. Every time he walked into the hospital, he felt something watching him. The whispers clung to him, day and night. You killed me. You won't escape. He had emptied his bottle of sedatives, but nothing could silence the terror. And now, he had only one choice left. Outside New York General Hospital, the storm howled. Wind screamed through the windows, rain pounded against the glass like 1,000 tiny hands trying to break in. Inside, Michael dragged himself through the hallway, his steps heavy as if shackled by the weight of his past. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't run anymore. He had to face Matthew. With trembling hands, he pushed open the door to the neonatal care unit. The room was dark, lit only by the faint glow of the streetlights outside. And there, in the tiny crib, lay Matthew. His eyes were wide open, staring straight at Michael. Not crying. Not moving. Just, watching. I know you're here, Michael whispered, his voice hoarse with fear. The baby didn't react. But the air in the room turned ice cold, his breath becoming visible in the dim light. And then, it moved. Matthew slowly tilted his head, his gaze never leaving Michael. Michael felt the world spin, cold sweat trickling down his temples. I didn't mean to. His voice shook. I only wanted to save you. No response. Matthew just stared, his eyes empty, devoid of forgiveness. Then, the window burst open. Wind howled through the room, the curtains flailing wildly. Every light flickered out. Michael stumbled back, his heart hammering against his ribs. Then, a voice spoke. Not Matthew's. But the voice of the baby from 20 years ago. You killed me. Michael screamed, clutching his head. No. I didn't want to. I only wanted to save you. But the voice did not stop. You killed me, you buried me, and now, I have returned. Michael collapsed to the floor. There was no way out. He had to speak the truth. Just then, the door burst open. Maria Owens rushed in, followed by Dr. Andrew Harris and Nurse Lucy Parker. They found Michael kneeling on the floor, his hands gripping his head, his entire body trembling. Dr. Roberts. Maria cried, running toward him. Michael lifted his head. His eyes were bloodshot, his face twisted with terror. I killed it. He whispered. Everyone froze. What did you say? Andrew frowned. Michael choked on his words, as if every syllable strangled him. 20 years ago, the baby from that delivery, it didn't die from complications. The air in the room went still. Maria held her breath. Then, what happened? Michael clenched his fists, his body shaking. I made a mistake. I heard it during delivery. Lucy covered her mouth in shock. Michael continued, his voice cracking. It was alive, for a moment. I saw it twitch, but I was afraid. I was afraid they would find out what I had done wrong. A single tear slipped down his aged cheek. So I. His voice dropped to a whisper. I smothered it. The room plunged into an eerie silence. No one dared to breathe. No one could believe it. Dr. Michael Roberts, the man who had saved thousands of lives, had taken the life of a newborn with his own hands. At that moment, Matthew closed his eyes. For the first time since he was born, his tiny lips moved. Not to speak, but to smile. A soft smile, one that carried a terrifying meaning. Maria felt a chill crawl up her spine. "Dr. Michael, you've confessed." Michael broke down in sobs. "I was wrong. I killed him. I deserve to be punished." Outside, the raging storm began to calm. But inside the room, no one felt relief. Matthew's breathing remained steady, as if he had finally received what he had been waiting for. A confession. The truth had been revealed. But the punishment was not yet over. Following Dr. Michael Roberts' horrifying confession, the neonatal care unit remained trapped in a chilling silence. No one spoke. No one dared to. Maria Owens, Dr. Andrew Harris, and Nurse Lucy Parker stood frozen, still reeling from the truth that had just unraveled before them. Michael knelt on the floor, his old hands covering his face in despair. His entire body trembled, as if his very soul was being drained by the weight of his past sins. But the most terrifying thing of all. Matthew remained still in his tiny crib. The newborn did not cry. Did not react like an ordinary baby. His small eyes opened slightly, reflecting an unsettling calm. Then, suddenly, Matthew smiled. That smile sent an icy wave of terror down Michael's spine. It was not the innocent smile of a newborn. It was the smile of a soul that had waited far too long to witness justice. Eleanor broke down in tears. At that moment, the door swung open, and Eleanor Foster, Matthew's mother, rushed in. She had heard everything. Her face was ashen, her hands trembling as she slowly stepped toward Michael. "You." Her voice cracked. "You murdered an innocent child, and now, my son, is carrying the weight of that." Michael looked up, his eyes hollow with pain. I didn't mean to." he stammered. Eleanor shook her head, tears streaming down her pale cheeks. "No, you made a choice. You chose to snuff out a child's life because you were too afraid to face the consequences." She turned to Matthew's crib, gazing at her son for a long time. Then, she broke into heart-wrenching sobs. "I'm sorry, Matthew. I didn't know. I didn't know anything." But Matthew did not cry. He only looked at his mother, his eyes shimmering with an understanding far beyond his age. And then, something extraordinary happened. Matthew lifted his tiny hand. The room was instantly filled with an inexplicable warmth. A gentle breeze swept through, carrying a sense of serenity. Michael shivered, feeling as though an invisible light had enveloped the room. And then, a voice echoed. Soft. Peaceful. "I forgive you." The room stood still. Maria felt her heart stop. Eleanor choked back a sob. And Michael collapsed to the floor, weeping like a child. The nightmare that had haunted him for 20 years had finally come to an end. But was it truly redemption? Or just the beginning of his punishment? Outside the hospital, the storm had passed. Rain still fell, but it no longer howled in rage. It was now a gentle cascade, washing away the dirt and sorrow. Inside the neonatal care unit, Eleanor held Matthew tightly, her tears still flowing. Maria looked at Michael, her expression unreadable. "The truth has been revealed," she whispered. Michael said nothing. He was no longer the confident, powerful doctor he once was. He was just an old man, kneeling before the weight of his sins. Dr. Andrew Harris stepped forward, placing a hand on Michael's shoulder. "You have to take responsibility for what you've done." Michael didn't resist. "I know." His voice was hoarse. For the first time in 20 years, he no longer wanted to run. The next day, Michael walked into the hospital director's office. Samuel Nelson, the director of New York General Hospital, stared at him. "You want to resign?" Michael nodded. "And I will confess everything." Samuel sighed, leaning back in his chair. You realize this will destroy your career, don't you? Michael let out a bitter laugh. My career died 20 years ago. Samuel remained silent for a long time. Finally, he said. Good. Then go and atone, Roberts. 3 days later, a bombshell article hit every major news outlet in New York. Renowned Dr. Michael Roberts confesses to hiding an infant's death for 20 years. The city was in an uproar. New York General Hospital was immediately placed under investigation. The medical board intervened. Michael faced the courts, the public, and everything he had tried to bury for decades. But he was no longer afraid. Because he knew. This was the price he had to pay. At Eleanor's home, Matthew slept soundly in his mother's arms. He was now like any other baby. No strange eyes. No eerie silence. Only a soul that had finally been set free. Eleanor smiled, placing a soft kiss on her son's forehead. It's over now, my love. Matthew stirred slightly, his tiny lips curling into a peaceful smile. Outside the window, the sun began to rise. A new chapter had begun. 3 weeks after his confession, Dr. Michael Roberts stood trial. The Central Court of New York was packed. Journalists, doctors, victims he had deceived, and hundreds of curious citizens filled the room. Today's trial wouldn't just decide Michael's fate. It would expose a crime buried for 20 years. Michael sat at the defendant's bench, dressed in a wrinkled gray suit. He no longer carried the arrogance of a prestigious doctor. Now, he was just a broken man, his eyes hollow from sleepless nights. In the front row, Eleanor Foster held Matthew close. Beside her, Maria Owens and Dr. Andrew Harris watched silently. For the first time in his life, Michael had no one on his side. Judge David Douglas banged his gavel, announcing the start of the trial. Defendant Michael Roberts, you are charged with covering up the death of an infant, falsifying medical records, and gross ethical misconduct. Do you have anything to say? Michael rose, his voice raw. I plead guilty. The courtroom went silent. No defense. No plea for mercy. Just an acceptance of fate. The judge nodded and gestured for the prosecutor, Carlos Vance, to proceed. Tell us the full truth. Michael took a deep breath and began. 20 years ago, I delivered a baby for a woman named Sophia Grant. The child was born with asphyxia. I tried to save him, but I made a mistake. His hands clenched, his gaze falling to the floor. I performed a procedure incorrectly. Just 1 second, but it was enough to take the baby's life. Michael paused for a moment before continuing. I was terrified. I was afraid of lawsuits, of losing my reputation. So I, along with the hospital director at the time, falsified the records, stating the child died of natural complications. Murmurs spread through the courtroom. Michael closed his eyes, his voice breaking. But I never knew, that soul never left. Eleanor tightened her grip on Matthew. She knew exactly who Michael was talking about. The newborn in her arms. Matthew was living proof of it all. After 3 hours of deliberation, the judge rose to deliver the verdict. Defendant Michael Roberts is sentenced to 10 years in prison for falsifying medical records, gross ethical misconduct, and covering up the death of an infant. The gavel struck. It was over. Michael did not protest. He closed his eyes, as if he had finally found a sliver of peace within his tormented soul. 20 years of running. 20 years of guilt. Now, he had nowhere left to run. Years later, Maria decided to visit Michael. Rikers Island Correctional Facility, on the outskirts of New York, was where he was serving his sentence. When Maria stepped into the visitation room, Michael was already there, dressed in a gray prison uniform. He looked thinner, frilier than before. I didn't think you would come, he said, his voice low. Maria sat down, studying him for a long moment. I just wanted to know, do you regret it? Michael let out a soft, bitter chuckle. I've regretted it for a very long time. But I never had the courage to face it. Maria was silent for a while before asking. What do you plan to do with the rest of your time? Michael closed his eyes, sighing. I'll write. I'll write everything I've done. I want to leave behind a warning for future doctors. Maria nodded. Though Michael had committed a terrible crime, at least he had chosen to atone for it. As time passed, Michael began using his medical knowledge to help fellow inmates. He became a doctor inside the prison, treating prisoners who had no access to proper healthcare. He also wrote a memoir, recounting everything: his mistakes, his guilt, and the haunting that had followed him. The book was titled The Child's Soul. When it was published, it became one of the most shocking books in the history of American medicine. While Michael sought redemption behind bars, Eleanor began a new life with her son. She left New York and moved to a small town near Monterey, California, where she could raise Matthew in peace. She opened a private clinic, dedicating her work to helping pregnant women in need. Matthew grew up healthy and happy, no longer haunted by eerie eyes or supernatural occurrences. He finally got to live like a normal child. A soul had been set free. Michael had paid for his sins. Eleanor had found peace. Matthew had a new life. And Maria had witnessed it all. She knew she had done the right thing by never giving up. By uncovering the truth. The last time she saw Michael, he told her something she would never forget. Thank you, Maria. If it weren't for you, I might never have had the courage to face the truth. Maria simply smiled. Sometimes, the truth is painful, but it is necessary. Michael nodded. And for the first time in 20 years, he smiled a quiet, relieved smile. Time passed like the wind. 10 years had gone by since Dr. Michael Roberts was sentenced. New York had changed, and so had New York General Hospital. New doctors had taken Michael's place, but his story remained a painful lesson in medical ethics. Today, someone had returned to the hospital. Maria Owens stepped through the grand entrance of New York General, a wave of nostalgia washing over her. She had left 5 years ago to work for a non-profit organization dedicated to maternal and infant healthcare. She was no longer a young nurse but now a respected medical professional. But today, she had returned for a special reason. She had an appointment with someone she never expected to see again. In a patient room reserved for the elderly, Michael Roberts sat on the bed, gazing thoughtfully out the window. He had aged significantly. His hair was completely white, his skin wrinkled, but his eyes no longer carried the weight of guilt. When Maria entered, he turned and smiled. Maria. I knew you would come. Maria pulled up a chair and sat beside him. I heard you were released. Michael nodded. I finished my sentence 3 months ago. But my body is failing me. I have heart disease. They say I only have a few months left. Maria fell silent. Despite his crimes, Michael had spent 10 years behind bars and dedicated the remainder of his life to helping sick inmates. Do you have any regrets? She asked. Michael chuckled softly. I spent a lifetime regretting. But now, I am no longer afraid. He looked down at his hands that had once taken a life, but had also saved thousands. I did terrible things, Maria. But I learned to face them. I don't expect forgiveness, but at least I didn't die living a lie. Maria nodded slightly. Do you want to see Matthew? Michael flinched. How is he? He's happy. Completely healthy. There's nothing strange about him anymore. A hint of relief flickered in Michael's tired eyes. That's good, he murmured. In a small town near Monterey, California, Eleanor Foster was busy at work in her clinic. She had built a new life there, dedicating herself to helping pregnant women in need, a way of repaying life for giving her and her son a second chance. Outside in the yard, a 10-year-old boy played soccer with his friends. Matthew. He had soft black hair, bright eyes, and a radiant smile. There were no traces of the eerie events from years past. No haunting silences. No ghosts of the past. Only a joyful, carefree child. As Eleanor stepped outside, Matthew ran to her, his voice filled with excitement. "Mom! I scored a goal." Eleanor laughed, ruffling his hair. "I knew you would. My little champion." Matthew beamed. He knew nothing of the darkness that had surrounded his birth. All he knew was that he had a loving mother and a life full of warmth. And perhaps, that was all that truly mattered. 3 months later, Michael Roberts passed away in a nursing home. He left peacefully, no pain, no fear. Before his death, he wrote a letter to Eleanor. "I do not ask for your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I saw Matthew from afar. He looked so happy. That brings me peace. Thank you for allowing me to atone in my own way. Michael." Eleanor received the letter on an autumn afternoon. She read it carefully, then sighed. She could never forget what Michael had done. But she also knew he had paid the price. And that was enough. She burned the letter, letting the ashes scatter in the wind. The past was over. Only the future lay ahead. New York had forgotten Michael Roberts, but his story lived on in the medical world. His book, The Child's Soul, became an essential text in medical ethics, a cautionary tale for all who wore the white coat. As for Eleanor, she continued her peaceful life with her son. One day, while playing in the garden, Matthew suddenly looked up at the sky. "Mom, I saw an old man smiling at me." Eleanor paused, following his gaze, but she saw nothing. Matthew grinned. "Maybe I imagined it." Eleanor stroked his hair, smiling. "Maybe you did." But deep down, she knew. It was Michael. At last, he had found his freedom. And the cycle of suffering had come to an end. This story is a powerful reminder of responsibility and ethics in medicine. A mistake may be buried, but the human conscience can never run forever. Michael chose the wrong path, but in the end, he had to face the consequences. It also highlights the power of truth, painful but necessary for redemption. And ultimately, forgiveness is not about forgetting, but about allowing those who suffered to find peace again.